So what can we learn from these last elections? Welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in, whether you are listening to us on all your podcast providers or watching us on Facebook and YouTube. We really appreciate it. We are going to analyse the elections. I was going to call them local elections, but there were national, regional, everything kind of elections that we've got. So this might be long, so it might get split over 2 episodes. We might have a few extra people coming in. Richard, I do know, has to go very soon, so he might dip out. But we really appreciate you logging on, because one thing I think is sure is that nothing is clear at the end of these elections, and all the parties have something to think about. So with me, we have a stellar group with us. We have David, Richard, Tom, Sam and Laura all making an appearance. So welcome, guys. I hope you are well rested. My heart has just about settled down after my very narrow election victory, which for all the world looked like I was going to lose. But, you know, so an incredible set of elections, all sorts of things. So we'll start off with you, Richard, as the grand statesman of the Lib Dem podcast. What are your initial impressions overall? Let's just do an overarching impression. So the Tories, I'll tell you, before I do that, Richard, I'll be kind to you. Let's give the audience an actual breakdown. So the Tories won 13 councils and were up 235 seats. A disastrous election for Labour councils, losing 8, losing over 300 seats. Lib Dems won 1 council, 8 extra councillors. Greens, no councils as was before, and got an extra 88 councillors. So, Richard, what do you make from that in a nutshell?
That's a very simple way of looking at it in a nutshell, because it was more complicated than that. In my brilliant blog, richardkemp.wordpress.com, I've looked at it and said that it's a tale of 2 Englands. On the Friday and Saturday in particular, we had the results coming in from the north, and on the Saturday night we were 34 seats down overall, and it had been very much a war of attrition between us and the Labour Party, with the Tories picking off Labour seats by the chunkful. We then started getting the results in from the southern counties, where we did very well picking up seats from the Tories. So there are, I think, political shifts going on, but I wonder more whether they're demographic shifts as well, particularly as young people educated to degree level are moving out of London. So quite complex, a whole series of regional patterns, still very few Tories, for example, in the whole of the Liverpool City region. But you go over to what they call the Red Wall area, and the Tories did well. But they should have done a lot better if nationally they'd done what they did in the north of England.
Yeah, and as someone who, my group was particularly hard hit by that Tory surge, we just couldn't keep out. So let's go to Laura, shall we? Laura, so your impressions on the day. Obviously, Sheffield made gains, but you think it was kind of middling, would you say, for yourself and the Lib Dems as a whole?
I think in Sheffield we had a good result. We went up 3 and we've taken the council to no overall control, which is a really big step. I think it's sort of, if you look at the kind of UK's core cities, they're, especially, you know, in the north, they're overwhelmingly dominated by Labour. The fact that Sheffield is now in overall control gives us a chance to actually work with others and start showing what the Liberal Democrats can do if we're given that influence. So I think there's negotiations ongoing as we speak between the Green Party, the Liberal Democrats and Labour. The one Conservative on the council doesn't seem to be featuring at the moment. But I think I don't want to kind of I don't mean jinx and work out what I mean. Anyway, I don't want to speculate on that while that's kind of ongoing. So I'll leave that one, and perhaps we can reflect on it later on. But I think it's been a really interesting set of election results. And certainly for the Liberal Democrats, I think we have outperformed expectations, and that story has been lost when we sort of look at sort of what's been going on, and in particular the Labour Party deciding to have a kind of massive meltdown in over the last few days has kind of kept us in the shadows. But actually, coming into this election, I don't think anyone expected us to be gaining seats. And I have to admit, I was a little bit more optimistic. I was looking at it and saying, well, I don't see where these huge losses are going to come from. We're likely to make gains in the core cities, and we're likely to make gains in the sort of Remain southeast. So, where are these huge losses going to come from? And we did have some areas that had some really heartbreaking results. In Cornwall, they made some big losses, and you've already, John, I know some of your colleagues in Lancashire didn't do as well as we'd hoped. And I think generally in kind of Conservative Leave areas, we struggled, but in kind of Labour facing areas and in Conservative Remain areas, we're making gains. And that does show that the party is alive and kicking on multiple fronts, and that we have a lot of positives that we can take from it. I think just because I might have to go as well, so I'm just going to get all my points in now. I'd also like to highlight John. I'm going to deeply embarrass John by talking about your result, because you got what was it, the wards that make up your county seat, we didn't win in overall, but then it came to your county seat being counted, and you snuck over the line. So that's obviously, I'm sure you can talk about it later in the pod, but I think that just shows what you can do with sort of several years of hard work and lots of door knocking. So well done, John.
Thank you very much. Very embarrassing. Thank you. Just to fill everyone in. So everyone saw my post probably on Thursday night after the polling, after short night. For all the world, it looked like I had lost. And then on the first count, because the city was done before the county, our two component wards, it looked like I was maybe 200 behind the Tories. And then literally at the 11th hour, I won by about 136 votes just by that, because by that turnaround. And like I said, you can only assume it's a personal vote. And I was telling Laura beforehand, I don't believe in personal vote. I'm screwed, basically, the night before. And no, that was, like I said, that's why my heart was basically stopped. But I was almost more upset when I won, because I'd prepared myself to lose. But hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Praetor Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Praetor Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Praetor Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Praetor Rains website at praetorrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats. This podcast has been sponsored by the Katora Coffee Club, the UK's most environmentally friendly coffee club. There are over 400 independent roasters in the UK, each one crafting coffee in their own unique style. Katora Coffee Club works with some of the best to take you on a voyage of coffee discovery. The Katora Coffee Club delivers ethically sourced and independently roast coffee directly to your door. Each month you'll receive between 2 and 4 bags of coffee and their monthly extract magazine. Even better for Lib Dem podcast listeners, use the code BETTERCOFFEE to save 5% on subscriptions and gift boxes for a limited time only. All Katora Coffee Club boxes are carbon negative and offset the CO2. So why not do some good, enjoy some great coffee and check out the website www.katoracoffeeclub.com. Now, back to the podcast. Sam, other than the Tories, anyone happy with this result?
Oh, I mean, the Greens seem to be pretty happy with this result because they've gained a number of councillors. But I think it's interesting. I mean, Laura talked about the way that that our result has been a little bit lost. I think on a national level, there's been a bit of presentation of, the Greens are coming, whereas actually they still have massively fewer councillors than us and huge areas. We talk about Lib Dem kind of black spots, well, I mean, that's nothing compared to those areas where there is kind of a complete dearth of activity from the Greens. I think the one thing we need to be aware of the Greens is that message. They have that hook that draws people to them, even if they don't have like an active campaigner. If there is a Green candidate there, they have a bit more of an immediate narrative, I think. And I think that's an interesting thing in terms of the way that, the Conservatives had a national narrative. There was a Conservative swing, and certainly I felt that in Oldham, and I think you felt that in Preston, and maybe that was different down south, but there was a clear national narrative. I think for the Greens, there was a bit of a national narrative. I think for us, it became very regionalised and very broken up. So, yeah, that's the other potential winner out of it.
I mean, the Greens had a funny thing. So, like I said, I think some Lib Dems keep enabling them as well, which I think because the Greens, we won 4 times as many seats as the Greens in the council, and they had some. But I feel Greens are going to struggle a little bit because at the moment they're getting the sod you all vote that we got for a long time. We might touch on Hartlepool, and people are saying, "Oh my word, the Lib Dems got 32% of the vote once in Hartlepool." They were never really our voters. These are people that just didn't like anybody else. But we'll go, Tom. So congratulations on becoming the largest party now in Stockport. So again, Labour losing control of that council. And then we'll talk about the mighty Hannah Kitchen and the Barnsley Lib Dems seem to go to strength to strength. And then David can give us a Scottish perspective. But Tom, why don't we start with you? So Stockport has gone into no overall control.
Yeah, Stockport was on no overall control before, but Labour we were joint with Labour on 26, and the Tories were on 8, and there were 3 independents. Now, Labour lost a seat. We managed to hold steady. So we're 20. So it's now 26, 25, I think 7, 3, and there is now 1 Green. So that was the big surprise of the night. Labour lost one of their safest seats to a Green, and there was it was a classic case of I don't think Labour were even aware that there was a Green campaign, and then suddenly in the final week there was a mad panic by the Labour Party to try and smear the Green candidate, which just kind of completely backfired on them. I think what I've been most impressed with in terms of not just Stockport but across the country, let's not forget that we haven't been able to campaign effectively for about a year and a half, 2 years. And to actually come out with a net gain, considering we haven't been able to knock on doors, do out leaflets, the usual stuff, I think it's been a really impressive result for the Liberal Democrats. We've done well against the Tories in this. I mean, everything's a wall now, isn't it? I've heard that now there's a blue wall that we're chipping into. I'm not so sure about that, but, it seems that we are doing well against the Conservatives. I think we did hold our own against Labour. And actually, I think we need to come out with our head held high because we've done very, very well across the country, considering how hard it has been for grassroots campaigning over the last 2 years.
And we should congratulate, obviously, another one of our contributors, Lisa Smart, who got re-elected. I mean, some of the Stockport result, I think you guys sent me it, where it's like you had Lib Dem going Tory, Tory going Lib Dem, Labour going somewhere. I mean, you were all over the place. But one place which had a fantastic night was Barnsley, the mighty Liberal metropolitan stronghold of Barnsley. Congratulations, Hannah. Well done on a wonderful campaign.
Thank you, John. Yep, we've now got 7 Liberal Democrat councillors in Barnsley, which I'm reliably assured is the biggest Liberal Democrat group ever on Barnsley Council. I think that's not hard to believe, really, is it?
That's a low bar you're setting, Hannah.
Yeah. But I mean, it is a low bar, Richard. When you consider that the last time these seats were up in 2016, we didn't stand a single candidate, not a single candidate. Yeah. And this time we stood a full slate of 21 candidates for the first time, which I am. I'm super pleased about. I think only 2 of those scraped it into triple figures, but you can't have it all, can you? And we targeted 4 wards. It became really obvious a couple of weeks ago that the one that was Tory facing, that Tory vote was just absolutely rock solid. Yeah. Not budging. And we didn't bin it off entirely because we knew that Labour were working it too, not to win, just to undo our squeeze and ensure the Tories stayed in. But we wanted to keep our second place there. So, we didn't completely bin it off, but we pulled back, kept the focus on what I thought was going to be the most marginal seat. And we made 3 gains. So we came out the count with what we wanted going in, which, I was in a real bubble for the whole of last week, just kind of really focused on this one rather iffy ward. And when I came out of the count on Friday night, I feel actually like we've pulled off a bit of a miracle in Barnsley, to be honest, compared to the results in West Yorkshire and the Tory vote, John. Just the state of the Tory vote in Barnsley was absolutely, the Conservatives were getting 900 votes in wards where they'd usually scrape a couple of hundred. These are east side of Barnsley, proper high deprivation, white working class, I'm really pleased that the Conservatives made absolutely no gains at all in Barnsley, and the Green Party made no gains. They targeted 1 ward, and the Conservatives pushed them into 3rd. And Labour gained a couple, lost a couple. So, we were the only party to make any gains. Good night.
Yeah, and I suppose anyone who wants to know, I actually just recommended this podcast to someone this morning who asked us about it, that Hannah was a part of our podcast about starting from scratch. And it was a really, really good podcast. And some people might think, oh man, we're in a complete back hole. You could be the next Barnsley. That's the new Lib Dem phrase that we can use. You could be the next Barnsley. But now, David, obviously, Scotland is a whole different kettle of fish for all sorts of reasons. So commiserations on your result. But I don't even know if you can possibly even unpick what's going on in Scotland at the moment. It seems to have everything and everything's going on.
Yeah. So, locally, from my constituency in Glasgow Kelvin, where I stood, it was never really expected we were going to do anything spectacular because obviously we were starting from a 5th place position. Patrick Harvey of the Greens kind of picks up that sort of anti-SNP vote, which is slightly weird because he just works for the SNP all the time, but somehow he manages to get that. And then, but there was a kind of hope that I might have been able to do enough to maybe leapfrog the Tories and get us into 4th place. I think the picture that I saw in Kelvin actually is quite representative of what happened in Scotland as a whole, because the Labour and the Conservative vote really squeezed us in the end. So we only dropped by 1% of our vote. We actually gained votes on the regional list in Kelvin. But what happened was Labour were effectively going round and telling people, we're the only people that can beat the SNP. You have to vote for us in the constituency or else you're going to get an SNP MSP. And they picked up what looked like quite a piece of both the Conservatives' vote share that fell and ours. From a Scottish perspective, look, the country is just divided 50-50 pretty much. I think it's 51% went to the unionist, if you can call them that, parties, and the other 49% went towards the SNP and the Greens. The country is entirely split down the middle. I think the difficult thing to kind of swallow is I was at the Glasgow count on the Saturday, and obviously the Glasgow constituencies are all counted at the Emirates Arena together. They split it across 2 days, so I only attended on the Saturday where they announced Cathcart, Kelvin, Provan and Shettleston, and I actually had to fill in for a couple of hustings for other people, for instance in Provan, where I debated Ivan McKee, who's the SNP MSP. And the thing that I found across the board is that the SNP on those hustings, etc., did not want to talk about the Constitution. They were absolutely saying, oh, yeah, we believe in independence, but right now we've got to focus on the pandemic. That's our number one focus. And then one after one, every single one of those SNP candidates who won the seat went up on that stage and said, this is absolutely a mandate for another independence referendum, and that's why people voted for me, and that's what I stood on. And I just thought, this is just, you've completely pushed away any view as to this is what we're focusing on. And then as soon as you've won, you've gone straight back to what you told people was not going to be the focus of your next government. I I think it's going to be a very difficult next 5 years, especially for the Scottish Liberal Democrats, because we lost a seat. So we now fall below the sort of, they call it the magic number 5, which means that you get to ask a question at First Minister's questions. So we don't have that right anymore. And we also no longer sit on the Parliamentary Business Committee, which effectively dictates the business that will come in front of the Parliament for the next term. So the next Scottish Parliament elections, we've got a lot of work to do, and we need to, I think the one thing we're seriously going to need to look at is how we work the regional list, because our votes since 2011 have fell off the face of the earth on those regional lists, and they've not come back since.
I kind of want to just talk about a little bit about the Lib Dem, because I get incredibly frustrated that, so someone like Mark, who lost his seat in my neighbouring ward, who worked his socks off, and like Hannah was saying, just couldn't hold back that tide, that Tory tide. And even people on the door were saying to us, you guys are the best locally. You work your socks off. You've done loads of work. We're voting Boris. What? I mean, brilliant. It pisses me off, because there doesn't seem to be any way we can push that back on that. And I hate being a slave to national swings to a point where, so how do we deal with that? Richard, you don't have Tories in Liverpool, but how can Lib Dems possibly counteract that on a local level? Because it's not like, I was saying to Laura before we came on, I probably made mistakes organising that campaign. No campaign is perfect, but we did more things right than wrong and still got absolutely trolleyed.
Well, I think we have to have a narrative at 2 levels. So in Liverpool, Sheffield, Stockport, we're able to create a Liverpool, Stockport, etc. persona. What we haven't got on top of that, though, at the moment, and it's not for the want of trying for people like Ed, is a national persona. Because the big question still is, what do we stand for? And I think that we've got a dilemma now as progressives. We think, let's just take 2 things. We think 2 things are very important. Brexit and what happens now, and the coronavirus and what happens now. And we put a 3rd one, constitutional reform. We know those are absolutely vital, but no one else gives a toss about them. So we have to work out whether we want to talk about the big principal issues or the issues that people want to talk about on a national level. I mean, clearly we're doing it at a local level. And I think the party's got that dilemma now. Even in Barnsley, we're probably seen in a way as some sort of metropolitan elite, rather than focusing on the bread and butter issues, which is taking the Tories and, for that matter, the Greens forward. I mean, the Greens did very poorly in Liverpool. They fell back in their 1 ward that they hold and one that they've got 1 seat for, and didn't win the 3rd. They put a lot of effort into. And so I don't think the Greens are winning because of climate change. I think they're winning in some areas because they out the Liberal Democrats in their campaigning.
Go on, Hannah.
I think, some people might sort of accuse me of being a bit naive because I've not been in this game for very long. But I do feel like this was an exceptional year, and B, I hope that this is high tide for the Tories. We've had 12 months where there's been 2 factors, which is 1, we've not been able to get out and campaign. We've not been able to get out and campaign, and not just even leafleting and being on the doorstep. I didn't go into Penistone Town Centre. That's the town in my ward. I didn't go to Penistone Town Centre for about 7 months. So that's people who normally, people always say, we always see Hannah out and about. Well, no one saw me out and about, for months and months and months. We're all hidden behind masks, which unfortunately people do track me down still and give me casework, but you're not quite as high visibility, are you? So, and all the events and things, that we normally support and talk about, and we've had to go super soft in our leaflets because, there wasn't that appetite for politicking. So we've not been able to campaign for the last 12 months in the way that we normally would. And that's really undermined our position of, we work hard all year round, we're brilliant local champions, we don't just pop up at election time asking for your vote, because that's exactly what we've done this year. And combine that with the fact that, well, number one, the only person that's been on telly for the last 12 months is Boris Johnson. And the fact that the Tories have, they've absolutely gamed the entire roadmap to coming out of lockdown to coincide with the local elections. It was very simple. If the vaccine rollout had gone badly, these elections would not have happened. And I think those two factors, that does make me feel like it's high tide for the Tories. There are, some of these voters will stick. What we've seen in Barnsley are these people that, voted Labour all their lives, because that's what you do in Barnsley, vote Labour, and either voted Labour or didn't bother voting. And then they moved to kind of UKIP, BNP, random fascists, whoever. And now, because of Brexit, they've moved to the Tories. And they couldn't have gone Labour to Tory, but, they've taken that circular route. And will they stick? I don't know. It's interesting when you look at the Tories' latest games, which is the attempt to suppress voters by introducing photographic ID. Well, that's all very well for what you consider to be a traditional Tory voter, middle-class person who lives in the Shires and has, sorry, that's my phone, and has both a driving licence and a passport. But when you start thinking about, the inroads they're making into the red wall, people who live in really quite deprived areas of Yorkshire and the northeast, are they not at risk of suppressing that vote as well?
I wonder if people care, or I've even figured out what it means, but it is interesting what you've said. And Dave, I was bringing, because what you said there, Hannah, is actually right. It's also the tone we've been able to have in our campaigning as well. And we did our election review as the councillor group last night, saying we have to take the gloves off over this next year. We have been very generous and said, okay, let's not bash the Tories and Lancashire County Council for the ridiculous stuff they're doing, because we don't want to seem like we're politicking. When that's not how, the Tories aren't playing by these rules. They are, like you say, they are rigging it to win. And we all know now that there's going to be a general election in 2023. So just to make my life interesting, that's when my city seat's up. So this is great fun for me at the moment. So David.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, because Hannah obviously spoke there about this this voter ID legislation. And what's quite interesting is I put up a post today on Twitter, and I was really surprised at some of the shocking responses that I got from people that aren't even connected to me, that, obviously somehow had found this and leapt all over it. I think you're right. There is probably a level of apathy from general people who don't really give a crap, but there's serious people out there that want to push this through. And there was quite a huge amount of, in some of these responses, undertones of racism about stopping certain people from certain communities being able to vote in these elections. And there was, talking about, we don't want Muslim people being able to dictate to the rest of their family who they can and can't vote for. And, you say, well, do you have any actual evidence that that's the case? No, but it's what I've heard. And I think there's people who will be pushing this rhetoric. So it's something we need to be very aware of, because there's people who are using that as quite a subversive way to stop certain communities being actively engaged in politics.
And it's just more dog whistle populism, isn't it? That's what kind of gets me. And go on, Laura, you look like you're bursting to come in.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is in many contexts, but not just this one. I think one of the things that makes me really annoyed is how mealy-mouthed we get, sort of talking about certain communities. And actually, I've been seeing that in some of the sort of commentary on the vaccine rollout as well. It's like, oh, well, we need to be concerned about the speed of the rollout in certain communities. It's like, no, I'm sorry, if you mean minority ethnic communities, then say so, and say which ones as well, because they're not all the same. Newsflash. And it's just a long-standing gripe, because I think it ultimately undermines how effective our policy can be. If we're not willing to say what we mean, then how are we ever gonna kind of reach the right place? But I think I just wanted to come back a bit to what Hannah was saying about the kind of high watermark for the Tories, where, I mean, I definitely think there's something in that, but I would be possibly slightly less optimistic for two reasons. I think firstly because the Labour Party seem to be doing everything within their power to make sure that this isn't the high watermark for the Tories, and we've seen that in the kind of self-immolation that they jumped into over the weekend, completely drowning out the sort of 2 days of local election results in which they did actually quite well. So there's that. And I think the second one is that I think one of the things that I've been reflecting on is that the Tories sort of the sort of culture war stuff and how well the Tories have done in the, you know, of this vaccine bounce in some of these traditional Labour areas. And you start thinking, well, actually, if they could stop, you know, if they could just like stop talking and stop with some of this culture war stuff, which I'm sorry, I just don't believe that the voters of Hartlepool are like desperate to vote for someone who's owning the Libs. I just don't think they care that much. I really don't. And I think if the Tories could like stop doing that, you know, just resist the temptation once in a while, then they could probably win the Hartlepools, and they would probably you know, win back some of their voters in some of their sort of traditional shire areas that are starting to move to us. Because, you know, at the moment, the fact that they're kind of deliberately going out of their way to alienate those voters for, as far as I can tell, no particular reason, I think we should be a little bit worried by that. So I think those are the kind of two reasons why I would add some caution to what Hannah said, although obviously I kind of very much hope that she's right. And yeah, I mean, 2023 I think is interesting as well, and I think the element to add in there is the boundary review, because I think, if I'm not wrong, the boundary review is the new boundaries are due to come in right after the local elections in May 2023, and are expected to be favourable to the Tories. So, you know, if I, you know, just putting out there that if I was sitting in Conservative Party HQ, I would be quite tempted to see how the local elections go, get those new boundaries in, absolutely shoot the fox with the Liberal Democrats, because, you know, we struggle to gain seats when we haven't been working them, and so new boundaries are already a difficult time for us, and kind of let everyone have a nice summer and then go in September 2023. So I mean, if I was sitting, I'm not a Tory party strategist, so, you know, I don't know how successful I'll be in getting the head of one, but if I was one, I think that's what I'd be thinking. So I think the lesson for that is for those of us that are kind of thinking about parliamentary seats, you know, as soon as the boundary review comes out, we need to get straight on to working the new boundaries, even if they might change later on.
Yeah. Breaking news, Laura Gordon isn't a Tory party strategist.
We thought it for a while, but
I know. I mean, I don't know. Perhaps I should be. I mean, you know, I've just given them 2 free bits of advice. You know, firstly about the culture war, and secondly about the boundaries. So
they'll be on the phone shortly, Laura.
Well, okay. You know, if they want to, you know, to pay me some money and I can shunt that straight back into my Liberal Democrat campaigning, then, you know.
No, they're more subtle than that. It'll be Dame Laura.
What could possibly go wrong? I see no flaws with this brilliant plan.
Arise, Dame Laura, don't they say? No, perhaps not.
John,
all our local councillors, I also want to point out just one thing. If I was a ruthless, heartless, conniving politico for the Tories, I would also add in a local government reorganisation at that same point as well. And you could decimate huge areas, because we know they're going to do it. They're going to move councils to single tiers. But when would you do it? You'd do it at the same time as a general election. That's what I would do. Sorry, David.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually throw something out to see if this could stir up a little bit of debate, John, because obviously following the last general election, there was a lot of talk about a potential progressive alliance with Labour, with the Greens and with other parties. I've been open to it, but I've always been exceptionally cautious about what that might look like. And obviously I know there's, you know, issues, for instance, with Richard in areas where, you know, we don't get on with Labour, and there's obviously other issues as well with the Greens, and some people want the SNP involved, which I would definitely be very much against. But I noticed over the weekend, obviously, the Greens had come out and now said they're not interested in a progressive alliance anymore because they think that they can take our vote away, and Labour have always been exceptionally ambivalent to any idea of a progressive alliance. So do we think, well, first of all, were people interested in that, or secondly, do we think that's even an opportunity for anything like that to happen for the next general election?
Go on, Tom.
So I've I was really lucky in the fact that, and I'm very grateful for them, that the Green Party stood down at the last general election in Cheadle. And I think there are ways that we can work with parties and things like that. But I'm very, very wary of calling and giving something a label. Because as soon as you start running on like a progressive alliance thing, then immediately you're going to be lumped in with all of the bad stuff from the other parties as well as the good stuff. And I look back at that 97 election where there was clearly discussions between the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats because we'd attacked the Tories on the same thing. And, you know, there were probably campaigns, even though the Labour Party put up candidates in all seats, probably except for Tatton, was it? Where there was the independent.
Martin Bell.
Yeah, the Martin Bell.
Yeah.
I mean, there was clearly places where the Labour Party put effort in and didn't put effort in, and likewise we put effort in and didn't put effort in. I think if we joined the Labour Party in a progressive alliance at that point, I think the Labour Party still would have won, but it wouldn't have been the landslide that it was, because we do need Conservatives to vote for us as well as Labour Party supporters, you know. So I think there's ways of working with other parties, but I'd be very, very hesitant to kind of put a brand on it.
Hannah, and then I'll bring Sam in because Sam's been very quiet with his nuggets of wisdom. So go on, Hannah.
Sorry, Sam. I mean, I am, anyone who knows me knows that I am vociferously anti-pacts and alliances, absolutely vociferously against it. And that's because, as David feels about the SNP in Scotland, I feel about Labour in South Yorkshire, and, you know, our Welsh colleagues feel about Plaid, and don't get me started on the Greens. I think the thing that people forget as well, when I say people, I mean the Labour Party forget as well, is that we already have an informal pact with the Labour Party that no one talks about. You know, how many constituencies are there in Sheffield, Laura? 6? Well, we work 2 of them.
5.5. Yeah.
5.5. So we work 1.5 of them, and the Labour Party get a free pass in the other 4. And same in Leeds. We've worked Leeds North West for years. The Labour Party get a free pass in all of the others. You know, there's no pact, there's no formal alliance. We always put a candidate on the ballot paper, and depending on the national swing, we'll either retain or lose our deposits. But, you know, we give Labour a free run in dozens and dozens of seats in urban metropolitan areas. And what do they do to us in every single one of our target seats? Turn their activists out, split the vote, let the Tories win. And they do that on purpose because they would rather see the Tories win than us.
Yeah, and again, Sam is coming in, I promise you, but I want to make a point though. When I thought I had lost my seat, I was getting private trolled messages from Labour councillors saying,
I think they've
What were they saying? What were they saying? I want to know what they were saying.
Again, Bosley wins. Bosley's eaten the lead, I think, in Preston.
What happens when the actual leader and person recording Lib Dem Pod has a technical...
Well, I guess we'll find out. It does still say that it's recording. I don't know. Sam, do you want to jump in with whatever you were about to say?
There's leadership, Anna.
He's still here, but only in spirit, not in actuality. I think there's also another element to this. I completely agree with what Hannah was saying. And you know, I was out campaigning with Lisa in Hazel Grove on election day when Labour went out in force to stop us getting in Hazel Grove. And it was just ridiculous. They had no chance of winning. They were just stopping us. But there's also another element, and we haven't talked about this in terms of the local election. So in my ward, where we scraped over the line by 42 votes, the person who was or the team who was in second place is one of the ultra-local parties. And they are campaigning on a all politicians are horrible ticket. And in particular in our area, you know, we've got a Labour council, we've got a Labour Greater Manchester Authority. You know, anything like that, they will seize upon as an opportunity to justify their claims of all politicians are in it together. They're all just the same. and we haven't really talked about these kind of ultra local parties and independents. I think there's a real thing, there were a lot more of these candidates in the local elections this time than we've ever had before. Now, there's a real gamut of who they are. In our area, we had an independent who is a complete independent. She's quite liberal. She's stood several times in her area. But, we've then got an organisation which is somewhere between BNP and UKIP, and they're standing as an independent. There's a lot. There seems to be a lot of traction in specific areas for these kind of ultra local groups. In ours, I think 4 of their candidates were ex-UKIP. I think, and bizarrely, in the same party, 4 of their candidates are ex-Labour. But it's something we need to be aware of, is not just kind of what's happening with the other parties, but what's happening with non-parties and how they would use, how both the other parties, like if we go into any kind of coalition, the Conservatives will just leap on that, but so will other groups. And we need to be really conscious of what the impact will be across these different groups if we do certainly any kind of formal alliance, but even anything that's just an ad hoc thing where we're not campaigning too much here.
Am I back?
You are.
You are.
So sorry about that. I could hear all you. It seemed to be going fine, but then my screen was just stuck like that. Yeah. So basically, Labour love it when we lose, and as much as I have time for moderate Labour people, they would love it if we didn't exist. And that's kind of going back to it, and it's brutal. And every time I think, oh yeah, he's a really nice Labour councillor. There's some left-wing trot next to him that just believes I'm evil, and I think and I want to bring Richard in because I do know that to go. So a final word, kind of on Labour. I mean, I don't see how Labour can survive. Obviously, they're massively powerful, but this division inside them is now they can't appeal to the 2 parts of the electorate they need to win. You're either going to be a metropolitan kind of London, Cambridge sort of party, or you're going to appeal to what you have done in places like the North, etc. And I'll say one thing about the Preston Labour Party, because they've been all over the place saying, Labour in Preston kept their seats. It shows you that Corbynista Preston can survive. The problem is, though, us and Tories are knocking lumps out of each other in the suburbs and giving Labour a free pass in the vast majority of Preston. That's the honesty of it, that most political parties are too weak to take on these Labour areas. But over to you, Richard. What are your thoughts about Labour and what they're going to do next?
Well, firstly, I very much agree that we are not in some of the areas we should be. And I'm determined in Liverpool that we will return to some of the most difficult parts of the city, some of which we have represented in the past, who are desperately crying out for decent representation. And I've already said that we will target 2 wards. I haven't said which yet. We will target 2 very hard Labour wards next time. But what is the Labour Party? So that's one of the problems with the Progressive Alliance. In Liverpool, the Labour Party are not progressive. You've got half of them who hark back to the 60s and 70s, believe in huge unionisation, talk about each other being brother and sister. The most funny ones are the very middle class ones who claim they're working class because their great-grandfather was a docker. That's what being working class means to them, as they sip their Chianti with their doctorates. So the Labour Party is hopelessly split. What keeps them together is, at the moment, their own personal advantage. There are 1 or 2 people in Liverpool who might come over to us. I wouldn't have most of them if they offered, but I wish. Sorry, that was my butler, by the way, Hannah. I've trained her very well over. She's very cheap. Can we cut that bit, John? Do not send that to
no chance. That is definitely going out because we all know out of the Kemp household, everyone's Team Erica. So,
yeah. So yes, can the Labour parties hold together as long as they see the personal advantage, and in local government terms the SRAs, and in national terms their way to get to Parliament? The fact they hate each other doesn't mean to say they won't work together for their own sake.
I can't believe you brought in SRAs. For anyone that doesn't know, which is probably the lion's share, that's special responsibility allowances, which councillors get for being on certain committees. So, Richard, well done for the dorkiest mention of the day anyway. But...
yeah. Okay, and I am going now to have my first face-to-face meeting with the Chief Executive and the new Mayor of Liverpool, who unbelievably is also called Joe Anderson.
I know, how confusing was that? Could they not have figured that out? But no, thank you, Richard.
Doesn't matter. The bastards won. There we are. I'm off. Cheers. Bye.
Bye. Go on, Laura. You've obviously you've had.
Yeah, I'm going to have to run off as well. But I think, yeah, I mean, I just to sort of agree on a progressive alliance. Really, I've got a couple of issues with it. I mean, I think first one is the name. It feels a little bit sneery, to be honest. It's like, oh well, if you're on our side, you're progressive, and if you've ever voted Conservative, then you're not progressive, and you can't be on our team. It just feels like everything that people don't like about the sort of liberal left, this idea that we are sneering at people. I really dislike it. So there's that. It's a massive branding issue, but also it just speaks to a desire to do it the easy way, and there isn't an easy way. It's like if we add up all of these little votes for different parties and ignore the fact that these parties stand for different things and people voted for them for a reason, and move the voters around like they're little, like, you know, toy soldiers, then we won't have to do the difficult work of persuading everyone, because we can make the numbers add up. And I'm sorry, lads, but it just doesn't work that way. Like, actually, we have to persuade people to vote for us, and ultimately voters understand how the voting system works, and if they want to vote tactically, they're very good at figuring out how to do it. And if they don't vote tactically, it's probably because you haven't made a good enough case. And just sitting there and saying, well, we should have so and so should have stood down for so and so, it just doesn't work like that, and it shouldn't work like that. Where I think it does potentially have a value is, I think the signaling effect is quite valuable. I think there is something in, having the sort of the Greens standing down for the Lib Dems and vice versa, that sort of says to our supporters, encourages them to think in that way. But for me, the negatives outweigh the positives. And, I also think you can get the positives more easily without kind of trying to cheat the system by, just sort of non-aggression and, potentially even, looking at things like, joint media appearances or, statements and so on that the leaders could put out during election time. So I think there's other ways that we could get those kind of signalling benefits, which I think are quite important, without this sort of all of the kind of angst that seat negotiations bring. And I just don't think for much real benefit.
And I wonder, because I kind of want Tom and Hannah to talk about this a little bit, because Tom, you're obviously in a target seat. You are in one of the most high priority seats in Cheadle. So if we've talked a bit about, is the problem more with us? The fact that we're not cutting through. And then Hannah, you obviously were a big advocate for Ed Davey in the leadership election. What should the leadership be doing different, if they can do anything different? I want both your perspectives on this, really, because again, it kind of goes into my feeling. I feel we've got to be the drivers of change a little bit. So what do we do then, Tom?
Oh, what do we do? I think that's a whole podcast episode there, John.
Okay,
if I'm honest. I think what we've got to do is, nationally, we've got to our targeting strategy has got to be completely ruthless. First of all, like, there are only, I would say, 22, maybe 25 seats where we really can stand a chance of winning. So the party needs to concentrate on those 20, 25 seats. And we should be kind of going, we are going to make, as well as holding what we've got, we are going to make 20 gains. And that nothing is going to stop us making those 20 gains. I think what happened last time, there was some polling that the National Party chose to look at, which kind of showed us going into 200, potentially 200 seats or something. And I think we absolutely over target. Like, I mean, it's not even targeting. It was just it became madness. So I think there's that. I also think that we need to get back to the one thing that I've learned actually over the last couple of years, particularly since Brexit, is that voters and residents and want to be listened to. And if we look at the results that happened in Cheadle, we had a mixed bag really in Cheadle. We won the constituency by about 7%. We did well in some areas. There was one loss, which I think could have been avoided, which was a bit frustrating. But really where we did better was where we were knocking on doors and listening to people, not knocking on doors and telling them what we think. So it was picking up the casework. It was letting people have a bit of a whinge on the door, having people, tell us what they, so we weren't talking about kind of green spaces half the time. We were talking about policing. We were talking about traffic and congestion on roads. These are the stuff that everyone was really talking about because it was the stuff that affected them day to day. And I think we've got to get back to that. Like, we will win those 20 seats by knocking on doors, listening to people and taking up action on what they're saying. There isn't going to be a grand scheme. We're not going to come up on a national level and say, like, we've got a policy that's going to, a policy that's going to fix education or a policy for the NHS, because people go, well, that's really nice, but you're never going to win. So what we need to do is we need to get 20 kind of almost by-election candidates elected at the next election. That's what we've got to do, in my view.
Hannah?
Yeah, I think Tom's right. I mean, we had in the last general election, I think we had what we thought was a big national campaign, and that worked out really well, didn't it? But I think, in terms of Ed, and I am an Ed fan. I'm still an Ed fan. What I really like about Ed is, he's not an embarrassment.
Yeah.
He doesn't say anything embarrassing. He's not very interesting, That sounds awful, doesn't it? But, he's not going to go tap dancing onto the stage or anything, but that's okay. I think that's our secret weapon. What makes me cringe is when another unnamed MP who is not our leader is tweeting things like, isn't it brilliant that the Lib Dems stepped down for the Greens here? We're working really well together and facilitating lots of Green councillors getting elected. That, to me, undermines our national position. And, he's not doing anything. He's not doing anything like that. Ed is fine. Ed is lovely. He's a super nice man. One person did tell us on the doorsteps this year that they weren't going to vote for us because they didn't like Ed Davey, which is, how can you not like, you might not agree with him, but how can you, he's like the nicest man on earth.
He's Joe Biden. He's basically, he is very vanilla in terms
That's actually a very apt description. He is like, Joe Biden's not like this big inspiring candidate, but he's the candidate that was, could get a mass of people behind him to beat a very unlikable person.
And everything he says is good. I think our agenda on carers, I think it's brilliant. All the stuff we do on social care, and it's genuine, it's authentic. When he talks about it, his record on environmentalism is absolutely second to none. He's economically competent and sensible, and we can't be showy about all of those things because we don't get. But what I want, so as Tom says, you're out there, you've got by-election candidates knocking on doors, doing the work, doing the casework. And then when people go, well, all right, I like my local candidate, let's just check through the Lib Dem policies and check if they don't have anything utterly batshit. Well, we don't.
So, and you brought us into by-elections. Oh, Hannah, it's like, this is why we have you on the pod. You're the perfect segue. So obviously, Hartlepool was a disaster for Labour, but we all knew that was going to happen. Now we've got two more. Okay, so we're kind of rounding up a lot of the conversations. Should a Lib Dems stand in Batley and I can't remember.
We've got three, John.
We've got three.
There's one in Scotland. There's Airdrie and Shotts.
Oh, I'm sorry for that. Before the Scottish people complain to me, but obviously we've got the by-elections coming up, and obviously everything in the Lib Dem is going to be focused in Buckinghamshire to take that seat. But how do we think we should approach them? Sam, I know you just had your hand up. I don't know if it was this or the previous point, but because these by-elections, we're not going to do anything in the Yorkshire one. We're not going to keep our deposit in there. do we? And it's weird. Is any kind of progressive alliance? Is it more about kind of virtue signalling? So should Lib Dem say, well, you know what, we won't stand? No, we actually could stand. Okay, go on, Sam.
and
I just
that
I seethe at the words progressive alliance here.
I'm gonna have to go and get my daughter in like 30 seconds. So these will be my last thoughts on the matter. Part of Batley and Spen is the frankly Lib Dem stronghold of Clackheaton, which is Kath and Andrew Pinnock's. Well, it's Kath Pinnock, isn't it? Really?
Right.
No, Kath Pinnock's domain. And if we don't stand a candidate in that by-election, we should stand everywhere all the time, because otherwise people do not have the option to vote for a Liberal Democrat, and that is not democracy. And all those people that vote Liberal Democrat in the local elections because they like Kath Pinnock and they like Andrew Pinnock and they like John Lawson, we all of a sudden make ourselves look irrelevant.
Yeah, I suppose that's the point, though. If someone said to me, in Wyre and Preston North, which is a rock-solid Tory seat, if that suddenly was a by-election and someone said, oh, well, we shouldn't stand because we came, whatever, third or fourth or whatever we came last time, and then I would say, well, hang on, my ward's in there. What does it say to residents in my ward that have voted Lib Dem for 40 years that suddenly they can't? That's a really interesting point. But thank you, Hannah. I'll let you go pick up your daughter because we know how it rains in Yorkshire. But thank you very much. Sam, you can now come in.
I have to say, I think the two by-elections that you talked about, Batley and Chesham, are the perfect example of why it wouldn't work to have like a formal thing and with people stepping down. It's, and they are the perfect examples of where just, look about this sensibly as a party. We're not going to win Batley and Spen. Why would we plough effort and resources into that? We've got a good chance of certainly doing very well in Chesham. We've just taken the town council, so we would absolutely plough resources into that. So it already exists. The thing by which you would automatically kind of like concentrate your attention in the places that would succeed is already in place. So why would you risk annoying a whole lot of people by creating this artificial alliance, which we don't really want and we don't need? It doesn't help us. It doesn't help the residents. It doesn't help the campaigners in those constituencies. So who does it help? The only people I can see actually helping is the people that are, we want to lose those seats. It's going to help the Conservatives because they can just turn around and go, look at this. All you Tory voters, they're siding with the Labour Party. And the same happens in Batley and Spen. It's giving people a free shot at us when, frankly, they've already had too many shots at us. We need to be shooting back at them.
I take it, David. Tell me about the Scottish one. I feel really bad I've missed this Scottish one.
I feel like I opened a can of worms with this progressive alliance talk. By the way, just to give, because I think from my perspective, because I obviously opened this and I never gave kind of where my view is, and I said obviously I was very cautious about any sort of form of progressive alliance. I was more of the kind of what we talked about in terms of what happened, as Tom said, in like 1997, where you have kind of a kind of agreement that you'll have a candidate there, but they're not going to do anything, right? And that's ultimately, look, Jo Swinson lost her seat because effectively the Labour Party went out and campaigned hard there when they were never going to win, right? And that's how the SNP took that seat back. Now, obviously, John, you know my background. I was in the Labour Party for a number of years, but I know that there's Labour Party members that when I left said, I will never, ever talk to you again. And I was like, oh, okay, well, it's obviously very very nice of you. Even some people I helped get elected, by the way, which was like, okay. But yeah, sorry, the Airdrie Shotts by-election. So the sitting SNP MP stood down to stand for the Scottish Parliament. He's been elected. The SNP rules now mandate that if you want to stand for the Scottish Parliament, you have to resign your seat at Westminster, which is, if you remember, why Joanna Cherry didn't stand for Edinburgh Central, because she would have had to have given up her seat in Westminster, and obviously that's why Angus Robertson got selected. To be very upfront and honest, I cannot see anybody taking that seat off the SNP, not at this stage. Labour would have the best shot in Airdrie Shotts. What's very surprising about that is they didn't select the former Labour MP who put her name forward for the Airdrie Shotts seat, which is Pamela Nash, who obviously as well is well known for heading up the Scotland in the Union campaign. And they decided to go with someone else, which I thought was an interesting thing to do because she would obviously be a well-known name, and they decided not to give her a shot at it. So I reckon it'll be an SNP hold, but you never know. You never know.
And I suppose one area we haven't talked about today, and we'll do a podcast on it at some point in the future, is about what's happening in Wales. Again, Lib Dem's point of view, we lost Brecon and Radnorshire, but with Jane Dodds gained in the neighbouring seats. I think it was like
No, Jane. So obviously Wales is the same as Scotland. You have a regional proportional list, and you have so she's Midwest in Wales, which is in the area where Brecon is. So it encompasses that area as well. So we lost the seat, but because we lost the seat, we gained a list seat.
Okay. But it's a funny old time. I mean, a lot of the Lib Dem progress seems to have been, like I say, one step forward, one step back a little bit in this election. I think that's probably how I kind of sum it up, really. But no, I mean, anything else you guys want to talk about? We've talked about lots of things, like I said, about Greens, Tories. I mean, we just have to keep on going. I think what Tom's right is that, it's been such an unusual year. I think it's an odd year. And we were saying on polling, just before polling day, the Tories will never have a better chance of beating us in the seats we lost. Because we knew our campaign had been stilted. We knew and lots of national issues overtaking local issues. And Lib Dems, some get frustrated by saying, you've got to dust yourself off and go again, because it can feel like a thankless task when you've lost some of your friends who have put their heart and soul into a seat. But otherwise, you let the bastards win, don't you? Mm. And that's the only thing, and that's what we've got to do, because we are that voice. Because Labour's not going to do it. Labour aren't going to challenge in these Tory areas. Labour can't even challenge in their own areas sometimes. So no, but thanks very much, guys. Is there anything else you guys want to bring up?
The only thing I was going to say, John, was exactly what you said. Look, I took an absolute hammering in Glasgow, right? And the next day I dusted myself off. I put up a gif of Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, "I'll be back," because that's ultimately what we have to do. We just need to get stuck in, go again, and just, but I think, as we kind of talked about on this podcast, serious, proper targeting about where we're going to make serious gains, and that's what our route forward has to be.
And I think sometimes, and this is going to sound very cruel, there are sometimes some armchair campaigners within the Lib Dems who will say, absolutely, we should do this, and why aren't we doing this, and have no idea what they're talking about on the ground. And I think I know that's brutal honesty, but
surely not, John. Surely not.
And I love some of these guys. They can be absolutely lovely policy wonks, but they are utterly clueless with what it is on the ground sometimes. But parties take all sorts, and we need those people. We sometimes, you need the scrappers and you need the thinkers, and every now and again you get both. But yeah, no, lovely. Well, thanks so much, guys, and thank you to Richard, Laura, and Hannah as well for contributing. Thank you, everyone, for listening. What are your thoughts? Where should Lib Dems go? What should Lib Dems do? What's going to happen to the Labour Party, the Tories, the Greens? By all means, send us a question, comment below, like and subscribe to the podcast. If you do watch us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. If you do watch us on Facebook, make sure you like the page and turn on your notifications so you'll get updates every time we have a new episode. But do try and relax if you've just come out of elections. I know my brain's still in a little bit of election mode, so do enjoy a week off and then get on with your thank you leaflets. So thank you very much for watching and listening, and we'll have another episode very soon.